Good day, everyone. My name is Rich Chester, and I'm the Director of Business Intelligence at LPA Software Solutions. It's my pleasure to be with you today to talk to you about two topics. First, we'll start with what's new in the IBM Cognos Analytics Release 9, otherwise known as version 11.0.9. And when we finish with that, I'd like to introduce you to one of the functions in Cognos Analytics called Stories. A reminder that all of the webinars in our series, both the BI webinars as well as the webinars from our other practices, information management, financial performance management, and predictive analytics, are recorded and are available for free on our website at lpa.com/resources. Some highlighted videos would include our whole What's New in IBM Cognos Analytics series, which we've been doing since Cognos Analytics version 11.0.1. We have a full hour on data modules. We have another full hour on Cognos Analytics dashboards. We have webinars from our information management on our financial performance management team, as well as our predictive analytics team in the world of SPSS and in the world of Watson Analytics. All of them are there. They're also there on our YouTube channel. They're free. Hopefully they're informative, and I do hope that you will take the opportunity to look at our library and hopefully find some great education resources there. LPA is a full-service analytics consulting firm, and as such, there are a number of services that we offer that may actually work out to be the kinds of things you need help with in 2018. For example, in the business intelligence area, perhaps you're running Cognos BI version 8 or version 10, or even an earlier version of version 11. We have a set of migration services that will upgrade you to the latest version and can include training on all the new features and functions in that latest version. We install, we configure, we upgrade your content, we test, and we'll even help you as you go live and roll out the new version to your team. Some of you may be on Cognos version 7, Impromptu, for example, and need some help migrating those Impromptu reports over to Cognos Analytics. We have a whole series of services surrounding that migration. Perhaps you are finding that managing your Cognos Analytics environment is a challenge for you in 2018. And LPA has a whole set of managed services where we can provide you with Cognos Analytics administration services on demand, as well as a help desk and a how-to desk, and even ad hoc development support. So perhaps that would fit into your needs. If you have a backlog of reports, LPA has a reporting services offering. We have a team of folks based in Buffalo, New York, who have skills that would rapidly catch you up on your reporting backlog using either version 10 or version 11 technology. Perhaps your Cognos environment is not running as well as you think it should. We have a health check offering that will come in and will examine everything from how the software was installed to how it's configured to how the tuning settings are set up, and will even, if you wish, look at how your framework models, transformer models, and reports have been written to ensure that they conform to best practices and highlight for you opportunities where you could effectively get or hopefully get additional throughput, faster performance, or address whatever issues you have identified that you're having in your Cognos environment. And then finally, we have a full collection of training services. We have developed our own training materials along the lines of administration, various types of authoring, both relational and dimensional, a class on dashboards, a class on data modules, dynamic cubes, literally every topic you can think of in Cognos Analytics world, we have a training course for. And if we haven't developed our own training materials for it, we are an authorized reseller of the IBM training materials, so we can have our trainers use those materials to train your folks. We can offer our training services both on site, at your site, or with a virtual instructor approach where the instructor and the students are not co-located, so that there's no travel expense for the instructor or for your folks, especially if your folks are spread out. So what's new in Cognos Analytics Release 9? In the world of dashboards, they've added Latitude and Longitude to maps. Because you can now display 3 different layers in a map, they've also added in the dashboard world a visibility control that allows you to turn on and off the layers that have been defined for a map. You can change a dashboard to full screen mode. If you were on my version 1108 webinar, you know that they had done that for stories in 1108. In dashboards, they now have a full screen mode in 1109. When you are viewing the dashboards, it used to be that depending on the size of your window, you might still have a wide navigation bar on the left. The navigation bar, to maximize the real estate available to display your dashboard when you're in view mode, that is not editing the dashboard, that will always revert now to the thin navigation bar on the left, where just the icons for team content and so on are visible as opposed to the icons in the words. There's also a new property on your label orientation in dashboards so that you can have more control over how labels are rendered on the x-axis in visualizations, some visualizations anyway, on your dashboard. In reporting, the function tab is now visible in the expression builder when you create, let's say, a query calculation, when you source your report from a data module. In previous releases, while you could use the functions in an expression, that tab was not there. So the tab is back. Sort of in a general mode as opposed to specific to dashboards or reporting. Planning analytics, which is what the rebranding of the TM1 product is. So planning analytics and TM1 subsets that have been defined in the cubes in planning analytics did not used to be visible or usable in your report. A subset is a collection of categories or members that you name so that you can quickly pull over a subset of your accounts or a subset of your locations or a subset of your customers that have certain attributes. And you couldn't use those subsets in reports and dashboards prior to this release. Now you can use those. From a mapping perspective, regardless of whether the mapper is in the dashboard or in the report, it is always a changing world. And recently, France decided to reduce the number of administrative regions in their country. They were trying to save some money, consolidate some services, that kind of thing. And in doing so, they created some new regions and they got rid of some old regions. So if you wanted to map the new regions in France, 1109 now includes those regions as polygons. And constant improvement in the world of aliases and polygons, every release, really, since the maps were added to Cognos Analytics. And so there were certainly additional of those in 1109. And prior to 1109, the number of points you could plot on a map was limited to 3,000. They've increased that limit tenfold to 30,000. So that's the list of enhancements that are new in Cognos Analytics Release 9. So let's take a closer look at those. Now, you might wonder where they're getting their enhancement ideas from. The Request for Enhancement community website is the primary source of enhancement ideas from end users like us to the IBM Cognos development team. So you can log into this DeveloperWorks/RFE website. You can create an account for free. And having created an account, you could review the enhancements that have been submitted. And for those that you like, you could vote to add your support to that enhancement. You could also open new enhancement ideas that others would be able to review and vote on. What the development management, the product management team for Cognos Analytics tells me is that this is now the primary source of enhancement ideas. They're going to take a look at the RFEs that have been submitted. examine those that have the highest vote counts, and those are the ones that are considered for inclusion in a release. So if you have a good idea, something you've always wanted to see in the tool, or something that's a brand new idea for IBM to consider adding to the tool, I would strongly encourage you to jump onto this RFE community, create an account, and start submitting ideas and voting so that your voice can be heard. And with 1108 and 1109, what product management tells me is that this website was virtually the only source. I don't think that's 100% true, but it was indeed the source of many of the enhancements in both of those releases. I'll also say that release 1108 and 1109 neither had a large number of enhancements. While the enhancements in both releases will be impactful, they were not the same quantity of enhancements that we've seen in earlier releases. And that's in part because they wanted to take the opportunity with these two releases not only to introduce new functionality, but also to address the bug reports and anomalies that we have been reporting through the support desk. So there is a substantial number of defect reports that have been addressed in both release 1108 and 1109 that are available in a list on the web. And you should take a look at that list and see if any of the anomalies that you've seen have been addressed. The release is one that I have upgraded to, by the by, a number of internal servers and 2 customers too. And I believe that the word stabilization definitely applies to this release. I have found it to be quite a stable release, FYI. Now, in terms of the actual enhancements in Release 9, adding the latitude-longitude layer in maps. Now, latitude-longitude capability in maps was added to reports in version 1108. So they've essentially brought dashboards on par with the report maps. Now remember, in a dashboard there are 2 map widgets. There is what's known as the legacy map widget, and then there is the widget called map. The maps I'm talking about on a dashboard are with that map widget. The legacy map widget is a RAVE visualization from prior to this new partnership with Mapbox that was exposed through the map widget. It's there for backwards compatibility, so you don't have to immediately rewrite dashboards from earlier in version 11 releases, but it would not be the map I'm talking about here in terms of this enhancement, or frankly the map that I would leverage when I was creating a brand new dashboard. Now, layers and maps, there are now 3. Prior to this release 9, there was a region that you could color code, countries at that granularity, all the way down to zip codes. So there was some decent granularity, but you couldn't get down to within a zip code a particular point in latitude and longitude. That's the new component in Release 9, is the latitude-longitude specificity in a map layer. So colored region down to zip code, still there, still works as advertised. And again, I mentioned earlier, they're constantly improving, adding to, and then keeping up with world changes in this notion of polygons that this region layer leverages. Also using those polygons and locations in that master list, you could plot a point, as shown on the screen. Those are points, and you could plot a point at on a country or in a state or in a city or on a zip code using those same collection of polygons. So that was what was there before Release 9. So those 2 layers still exist, and then we have a 3rd layer, latitude, longitude. And this one requires that you have a latitude and longitude data item in your source data. So important that you've geocoded your data before you can use this particular functionality. You add the latitude and longitude to the layer definition in the widget definition. And there are 2 measures that you can plot. You could plot a measure that controls the size of the point. So latitude, longitude results in points, just like the point layer results in points. You can control the size of the point with a measure. You could also control the color of a point with either the same measure or another measure. In addition, you can label the point. So in the picture here, I show that the latitude and longitude is what's shown. And if that is a meaningful label for your audience, then that is by default what it will show. If you want, though, let's say each of those points represented a customer or a customer location, you could drop a data item with the customer location name into the latitude longitude layer, and it would also display that location name in the screen tips. Now, in dashboards in this release, there's no way to turn off the latitude longitude display in the screen tip, and that doesn't actually happen in reporting. That latitude longitude display is not part of the screen tips and reports, and it is the intention in a future release. They think perhaps release 10, but they haven't promised per se. The latitude longitude label in the screen tip will actually be removed, so that maps in both reports and dashboard screen tips will be the same. But right now, the latitude longitude is part of the screen tip in a dashboard, and it's not something you can turn off in this release. And so you could use 1, 2, or 3 layers in your maps in dashboards now, just like you can in reports. Now, when you use multiple layers, there could be an awful lot of data being displayed. So there's been in dashboards the introduction of a new button that shows up in the upper left of your map. You see it outlined in red on my screen here. If you click that button, it shows all the regions that have been defined in your map. And you can then disable or enable the regions so that you can look at one region at a time. So in the map that I've shown in my screenshot, I had 2 regions defined, 2 layers defined. I had regions which were coloring cities, and I had latitude longitude points that were more precise than an entire city. And in the upper right screenshot, I've got just the regions layer visible, and the lower right screenshot, I've got the latitude longitude layer visible. So I can have both, which is what the default will be, one or the other when I've got 2 layers visible. So I get to control that now with this new button that shows up in the upper left of the map. Full screen mode is done through the full screen mode button in the upper right of the dashboard interface. Now, you click that double arrow, you will get to full screen. Doesn't matter what size your screen is. It doesn't actually matter what size your starting window is. Once you click that double-headed arrow, the dashboard will take up all the available real estate on the screen it's being displayed on. It hides the navigation bar. It hides the title bar across the top with the switcher and the other objects. If you were editing your dashboard when you click this button, it will take you out of the edit mode and into the view mode. And then when you exit full screen mode, which you would do by clicking your escape key or hovering your mouse in the lower right of the screen, another double-headed arrow will appear. It won't be there until you move your mouse button there. And you can then click the double-headed arrow to get out of the full screen mode. So it's an interactive viewing experience in full screen mode. Even if you started out when you clicked the full screen mode button in editing mode, where you have a lot of functionality available to you, once you're in full screen mode, you are limited to the functionality that you have when you're just viewing a dashboard as opposed to when you're just editing it. When you exit full screen mode, it'll bring you back to edit if that's where you started from. Now, I mentioned that you have more control over your x-axis labeling in this release. And on some widgets, for example, on a bar chart as shown here, there are x-axis labels. And prior releases, what Cognos, the tool, has tried to do is show as many as possible. So it would determine the way to express those x-axis labels where it could, based on the available real estate, show as many labels as could fit. And I think we've all had the experience where the number of bars was greater than the number of labels that would fit in the available space that we placed the chart in. But we've never had any real control over what happens. The automatic setting was all that was available. There was no property we could change. Starting with R9, though, if I select the chart and I go to the property sheet, there is a new property called Item Axis Label Orientation. The default is automatic. But when you click on that, the options as shown here, you can say present my labels horizontally, vertically, at a 45-degree, or stagger them. So rather than having Cognos try to make a best guess about how to maximize the visibility of the labels, you get to override that and set it the way you wish. Moving on to reports now. When you source a report from a data module and you create a calculation, up comes the expression editor. And in the expression editor, there's a function tab, and I use that a lot to look up functions, to get tips, to see syntax, understand the order of the operands for the functions. And when you sourced from a data module prior to this release, that tab did not have any content. And so I couldn't do that lookup. I had to, go from memory and trial and error potentially, or, potentially actually open a manual and look for the function information. Starting with R9, that function tab and its contents are back so that you have access to all of that help as you create calculations in data module sourced reports. From the world of planning analytics, if you own planning analytics and you have integrated your planning analytics or TM1 with Cognos, you may have been frustrated by the fact that the subsets that you've defined on the cube side have never been visible to you in reports or in Cognos 11 in dashboards for use. And so you would either have to redefine them again in the BI layer, even though you'd already defined them in the TM1 layer, or just not use them at all. With this release, the subsets will show up. You can see in the screenshot that the subsets that are there show up as little folder icons, I guess, with a white space in the center. Europe, for example, is a collection of the countries in Europe. And rather than rederive that on every report, I can now derive that once in planning analytics and just leverage it on my reports and dashboards. Now, it is very important that I be precise here, and I wasn't. So let me say it again. The connection must be from a planning analytics. So TM1, which ended technically that nomenclature with the version 10.2.2, the 10.2.2 TM1 connections, this is not available. This does not work for you in TM1 10.2.2 or before. You have to be on planning analytics. The current version of planning analytics, I believe, is 2.01. If you're on planning analytics and you create a data source or a data server specifically called the planning analytics connection, then this will work for you. By the way, subsets are dynamic. So for example, let's say I built a subset of members because I'm doing a particular analysis. Maybe it's a collection of customers that I am responsible for. And my boss comes in and gives me yet another customer to be responsible for. When I update that custom subset in planning analytics, when I go and run my reports, it will run with the new subset definition. So this is not some sort of static copy of the subset definition. This is live. This will use the current definition whenever you run the report or the dashboard. In Release 9, you cannot drill down on a subset member if you use it in a dashboard. Drill down in a report, no problem. But when you use a subset in a dashboard, the drilling functionality for drilling down on those members is not available in dashboards in this release. They expect to address that, the absence of that drill down functionality in a dashboard in the next release, in Release 10. Already mentioned that France underwent a change in terms of the number of metropolitan areas. They dropped from 22 down to 13. So in Release 9, the definition of the polygons that's baked into the tool actually now reflects these new regions, and some changed, some are new, that combined old regions, and of course there have been regions removed as a result as well. So all of that new definition is baked into Release 9. So wanted you to be aware of that. So let's go do a demonstration of some of the new features in Release 9. Before I do the demonstration, I want to show you one important resource for you. So if you search for IBM's website, What's New in Cognos Analytics Release 9, in their blog, one of the entries in the blog is a hyperlink called Updated Map Support Files. And if you click on that link, you'll find a box folder that's been shared, and the link will be there in the blog posting. And if you open that box folder, in there's a spreadsheet that would be that could be very useful to you. So I keep talking about that there's this collection of polygons that are baked into the tool that are used to present the region layers and the point layers in maps. And those all have names, whether the name is a zip code, whether the name is a city, whether the name is a state name, a county, or so on. Those all have names. So you actually have to have the same name in your data as the name of the polygon in order for the map to work. And sometimes we'll go ahead and we'll map something. We'll drag on our data that we think is a perfectly fine a name of a city or whatever, and you'll get an error. You'll get a little warning sign that says it's an ambiguous name. The spreadsheet here, this R9 named administrative boundaries, this is the exhaustive list of all of the quote-unquote acceptable names of the polygons. So you'll see, for example, that United States states, there's an official name for each one that's in this spreadsheet. There's also a collection of what are called aliases. So Massachusetts, has got a name Massachusetts, but it's got an alias MA. Now you'll also find in this spreadsheet that the alias MA also applies to the country of Morocco, which is why sometimes when we're defining a layer and the location for a layer for a point or a region, we need additional qualifiers, right? If I have MA in my data, how does Cognos know if I mean Morocco or Massachusetts? Well, the only way it would know is if I actually put the country data along with the state name in the layer definition. And then by doing that, right, the path becomes unambiguous. Well, all of those paths and what makes them unambiguous in terms of data values, that's what's contained in this spreadsheet. So if you are working with maps for the first time and are trying to get good geographic data into your database, or if you're working with maps and you're finding that you get these ambiguous messages, the yellow triangle that tells you that you've got regions that are ambiguous or are perhaps even undefined. To get the right data to understand what values are valid, this spreadsheet is the one you want. Every release, they put out a new spreadsheet like this. This is the latest one. And again, you can find this if you Google for IBM's blog on what's new in Release 9. And you follow through to the link on map support files. So wanted you to be aware of that so that you have that resource at your fingertips. So let's go ahead and create a dashboard and take a look at this mapping technology, the latitude and longitude stuff. So I've begun a new dashboard here. I'll just pick a layout. The layout's not important. I just want to show you a map. I'm going to select some data. This is out in the samples, so you can do this exact same sample yourself. If you go to the samples and you go to the data folder there, you'll find an entry called California Website Visits. This is a data module with some sample data in it. Go ahead and select that data module, add it to your dashboard, and you'll see that there is a spreadsheet of information that IBM provides in the samples that has a bunch of geographic information, including latitude and longitude, for locations in California, and then a bunch of measures that you can use in your map. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the list of visualizations. I'm going to grab the map visualization and add it to my canvas. Again, 2 map widgets. Legacy map is for backwards compatibility and is not the maps that we're talking about in terms of all this functionality. It's the map widget, the one that just says map. I'll drag that on to my canvas, and then I'll go back to my data so I can populate it. Whoops, there it is. So latitude and longitude is one of the three layers in the map. So you see the three layers are here. Regions require location information. This might be more than one column so that you can disambiguate a location, like states and country, because MA is ambiguous. Points have the same thing. These locations, these are names of these polygons that are in that spreadsheet. Latitude and longitude is indeed latitude and longitude values that must be resident in your data. You could use 1, 2, or all three. I'm just going to use 2 for my example here. So up here in my, my region area for location, I'm going to map zip codes. But because zip codes are one of these special things that, unless you disambiguate them from the get-go, don't always work the way you expect, I'll first drag in to my, my location country, and then within country, I'm going to add zip code. And by doing that, it's able to interpret my zip codes in California and plot them. Without country, I would not get the plot. It would give me an error that says that the zip codes are ambiguous. Strange but true. So anyway, in a dashboard, the last item you place in the list of locations is what you are actually trying to plot. In reports, the order is reversed when you add your locations. Not sure why that is, just happen to know that's what it is. So in a dashboard, the last region name you put here is the one that you're trying to plot. All the others you place in this drop zone are to disambiguate. I'm going to go ahead and say I'd like each region to be colored based on the number of website visits. And so we should see this area become kind of nice and colorful. It shows me with this automatic legend, you know, the darker blue is where the website visits are strongest. I'm going to go ahead now and add a second layer of data to my map. I'm going to grab my latitude column and my longitude column and drop that in here. And I should get a bunch of dots now on my second layer. And you see I've got this label drop zone. So if the latitude and longitude represent, let's say, stores, and each store has a name, I could drop the store name column here in the label. And then the screen tip that comes up, it would also give me the store name in addition to the latitude and longitude. I don't actually have in this particular data a label that makes sense. So I'm just going to go down here to the 2 measures. So you see right now the points are all gray. If I'd like to control the color based on the number of unique visitors to the website, I could drop unique visitors into the color, and then I should see some difference of colors, darker colors meaning bigger numbers of visitors. Okay. If I also wanted to control the size of the points, let's suppose that you know, I wanted to be able to compare website visits and unique visitors. The visitors will be the colors and the website visits will be the size. Then I'll get points of different size as well as points of different color. Now the size change here is somewhat difficult to see. There's some larger circles here and some smaller circles there. But fundamentally, hopefully you see that, you know, in the latitude longitude layer, I have a coordinate that I have to have resident in my data that I drop in, and then I can drop in 1 or 2 measures, and optionally I have this label. And in this case now I have a region layer and a latitude longitude layer. And when I'm just going to go ahead and collapse that onto the page, and there's my map with 2 layers. Now this button here in the upper left, this is that visible layers button. This lets me see which layers have been defined and allows me to disable a layer temporarily so that I can just see the individual layers. Because as you can see, you know, these layers could, you know, really occlude each other, right, in terms of visibility. This, you know, I can use this layer far better without this layer living on top of it. And, you know, maybe this blue regions behind the dots are distracting as well. So this gives me full control over the visibility of my layers. If I wanted to view this map in full screen mode, I could click on the full screen mode button, and now I'm in full screen mode. Notice the left and the top The components of the window are gone. Notice it maximized to fill my entire screen. And I am in view mode now. Even though I was in edit mode when I clicked the button, I'm now in view mode. So if I click on the item, I can't move it around, which is unique to editing. You can move widgets in editing, you can't move them in view mode, right? Full screen mode is always view mode, regardless of what mode you started in. I'm going to hover down here in the bottom right. You see how the double-headed arrow came up? When I'm over here, there's no double-headed arrow. When I come down here, it pops up. Kind of subtle. But if you click that, you'll exit full screen mode. Escape, in my opinion, is going to be the more natural gesture for most folks because that's what folks do when you're in full screen mode and other tools, and it works just fine here. One last example on the dashboards of the new functionality. I'm going to go ahead and add another tab just so I have some space, and I'm going to add a widget that is a column chart. And I'm going to drop in some city data for my bars, and I'm going to drop in website visits for my length. And I'll go ahead and collapse this guy. I want to show you that new property. So I'm now in automatic labeling mode, and you see I've got lots and lots of bars. And I simply do not have space to label every bar. So the automatic labeling is what's turned on now by default. Now, if I resize this guy smaller, I'll have even fewer labels show. If I resize it bigger, I will have more labels show. But up until this release, I really haven't been able to control what actually happens down here in the x-axis. If I turn on the property sheet, this item axis label orientation property is here. And if I go ahead in here, I can change what it's doing. Well, horizontal is apparently a horrible decision. Vertical, maybe that would fit in more. And right now my real estate's been changed because my property sheet is open. But stagger. Those are all options I can try. I'm going to try vertical and close my property sheet. And instead of the 45-degree default, I've got vertical. So I now have finer control over how those x-axis labels are displayed. And looking at the clock, that's about all the time I have for demonstrations. So why don't we move on to some questions. So some questions have been submitted through the web chat. If you have some questions that you haven't submitted, please do. Any questions that I don't have time to answer today while we're on the webinar together, I will definitely answer after the webinar via email. But I do have a few that have been submitted here. So first one is, can I use degrees, minutes, and seconds on a map? No. The latitude and longitude is actually based on the WGS84 coordinate system. I do not remember what WGS stands for, but the degrees, minutes, seconds coordinate system is not supported by the maps, neither in dashboards nor in reports, and but the WGS84 coordinates are. Next question, does Cognos Analytics have a geocoding capability? No. So I think I said earlier, you have to have your data geocoded. But Cognos Analytics doesn't have a geocoder tool that comes with it. So, this is a kind of thing where you might have to engage a third party to send them your location information, have them send you back a latitude and longitude for that data in the WGS84 coordinate system. And then you'd have to update your data sources to include that latitude and longitude column as numeric columns. Will the layer control be added to reports? I don't know. That layer control where I can click on it and it says which layers are visible is unique to dashboards in R9. It is not part of reports in R9, and I do not know whether IBM has a specific date in mind to add that to reports. If that you think would be an important enhancement, that would be something you could go out to the RFE site, see if it's listed there and vote for. And if it's not listed there, go ahead and add it so that folks can vote for it. So we can bring to IBM's attention that we think that would be an important add to the reporting world. And then the last question I think I might have time for is, I'm having trouble connecting to my planning analytics data. Are there any tricks? You know what? I had trouble connecting to my planning analytics data, and it took me a while to figure it out because I had to break down and read the documentation. And then I found that the integration between Cognos Analytics and Planning Analytics is through the Planning Analytics REST API. And what I found out is that the entry in the what's it called? The TM1S config file for a cube is called HTTP port number, and that is not a default entry in the config file. So I had to just go in and edit my config file, add a line, HTTP port number equals, give it a port number that was unique and wasn't in use elsewhere. Use that port number in my connection string in Cognos, and voila, my cube's connected, and I was able to access the cubes without any problem. Also, if your cube is set up for secure socket layer access, which is also in that config file, you're going to need to import the security, the SSL certificate, from your TM1 environment into your Cognos Analytics key store. And there is instructions on how to do that on the web. So I'm out of time for questions on Release 9. So let me introduce Cognos Analytics Stories. I'm going to talk to you about what storytelling looks like in a business setting, because I think storytelling, I think my kids and the joy we had reading books when they were young. But this is a business concept, and I want to talk to you about that business concept. Then I want to talk to you about how Cognos Analytics stories work and the steps to create your story. I'm going to talk to you specifically about a step that lets you reuse certain data assets in your Cognos Analytics environment, and that's called pinning. Talk to you about the story types, and then I'm going to show you a story, and I'm going to edit that story so you can see how you can impact a story and add objects and control timing and that kind of thing. So to get started, stories in general are a fundamental way we as humans communicate with one another. And they can be an effective business tool, especially if we're trying to persuade an audience to a point of view, or to a collection of actions, or to a particular message. I found this quote from John Baldoni that a careful blending of rhetoric, story, and facts woven together with a narrative can change minds. And that is the power of a story that we have actually often leveraged. We haven't often leveraged it by using an IBM Cognos technology directly per se, but a lot of us have used technologies to tell stories, usually in the form of slideshows, kind of what I'm doing right now. When you use a story, when you combine data, facts, visualizations, whatever you want to call it, with a narrative, it is far more likely to get a result than if you just present statistics and facts alone, because that only engages your audience's left brain, their logical brain, but doesn't engage them emotionally or creatively. And the other side of it is also true. If what you do is you provide a narrative that doesn't provide facts and examples, right, then you're only exercising the right brain. You're only trying to appeal to the emotional side, and you're leaving out the left brain and the analytical side. The most effective presentation is what combines those two items, which is what a story, by definition, is trying to do. It's trying to present data, facts, examples in a context of a narrative that appeals to both sides of our audience's brain. And by fully engaging our audience's brains, we are going to be far more effective at whatever we're trying to persuade them to understand, to do, or whatever message it is we want to convey to our business audience. Now, in Cognos Analytics, we've probably used, or in Cognos BI, we've probably used the tool, but we've used the tool to create a chart, let's say, and then we download that chart and maybe we download 3 or 4 or 5 charts. And then we use a tool like PowerPoint or maybe Apple Keynote, and we assemble those charts in a bunch of slides, and we also put text on the slides and pictures on the slides. And we build up a narrative with from slide to slide to take our audience through a story. The slides contain information from our BI world with data that supports the assertions we're making in our narrative. We've been doing this for a while. The thing is, with Cognos Analytics, we now have a tool that allows us to build the slides with live data and present our story, our slides, or our guided journey, which are the two types of stories that Cognos Analytics supports, all in one tool. And the cool thing outside of, I think, guided journey, at least for me, a PowerPoint user, that was new and a set of animation that I really kind of liked the notion of, that wasn't available to me in PowerPoint. But the slideshow, was been available to me in PowerPoint for a while, but I've never been able to use live data really in my PowerPoint. And so I haven't been able to take a question while I'm presenting, for example, and have a person question me about the data, actually stop the presentation and interact with the data live. But with the Cognos Analytics story capability, that's exactly what I can do. I can actually leverage the visualizations I've incorporated into my slideshow or my guided journey with my audience and truly interact with the story. Whereas when I had static copies of charts sitting in my slides, I really had no easy recourse for how I could do that, how I could delve deeper into the data if I needed to, right there in the moment. So that's sort of the additional value outside of having a tool that allows me to build the stories baked right into my Cognos Analytics tool, so I don't need a third-party tool. I can also interact with the data right then and there. Now, in terms of creating a story, right, we have to consider the message, we have to consider the conclusions or the actions or whatever the call is at the end. What are we trying to get our audience to do? To adopt a way of thinking, to adopt a philosophy, to agree to a course of action, whatever it is, we have to know what that is. We have to know our end before we can build a story that leads our audience to that conclusion. And we have to consider the narrative. Maybe we have to describe the situation about what's happening right now in our business or what has happened in our business that we're either trying to perpetuate or trying to avoid. We have to find the right examples. Now, those examples may exist already in other assets in business intelligence, or they may be assets I have to create that from BI or from external sources. But I have to collect a set of examples that I want to include. And then often I want to include the consequences of inaction in the story, right? The story should be, here's what's going on, here's examples of what's going on, here is the downside of doing nothing, here are the upsides of doing what I am proposing. That's a sort of, if you will, a typical story in a nutshell in terms of its components. Then I go gather those assets, whether they're web assets, whether they're BI assets. In our case, right, these assets might be in an existing dashboard or another story that someone else has built in Cognos Analytics. They might be assets that I get from outside. Regardless of where they come from, I've got to grab them. I can reuse, using this notion of pinning I mentioned earlier, assets in Cognos Analytics, or I can create brand new ones right in the story if I wish, just like I would create them in a dashboard. In fact, dashboards and stories are based on the same technology. I choose the storytelling format. Cognos Analytics has two, slideshows and guided journeys. Divide my story up into scenes so that it takes step by step through my storyboard. Assemble the components, animate the scenes if I wish, and then share the story with my audience. So those are sort of the steps of storytelling. In terms of gathering my assets, if I have, for example, a map or a chart that illustrates the point I'm trying to make in my story already available in a dashboard, I can go to that dashboard, click on that item that I like and I'd like to reuse. And when I click on it, up will come a toolbar, and one of the icons on the toolbar will be a little pin. And when I click that pin, you'll get a message that says that this widget has been added to your collection of pins. Now, you can pin visualizations, you can pin images, you can pin shapes, you can pin almost anything in an existing dashboard. It doesn't actually have to be a data asset. But regardless, you'll create a collection of pins, things you'd like to reuse in a new way, maybe in a new story, like this example. In your Cognos Analytics main screen, there is a pin button on the left-hand side shown in the second screenshot. When you click that, it shows you all of the pins you've collected, and you can leverage those. Now, I said something wrong. I want to correct myself. I want to go back and say the screenshot on the right-hand side is actually when I'm creating a story. And there's the pin button on the left-hand side of the story editor tool. When you click on that, you'll see all of the pins you've collected. So you click on a widget in an existing object, pin it, go to the dashboard or story you're creating, click on the pin button, drag it into your dashboard or story. So that's how pinning works. And that's, if it is a visualization, it's live. It's not a static copy of what it was when you saw it. Every time you open the story or the dashboard, the item you dragged in from your pins refreshes with new data. Two story types: slideshows, which if you want to, you could think of as a collection of PowerPoint slides, only they're done through Cognos Analytics, and a guided journey. Now, a guided journey is a layout of a single page with multiple objects on it. And the animation works where you see the entire page, give you like an overview, a broad view. Then it animates you to zoom into each object on the page, and then ends with the full picture view. So it's a pre-animated object that you would put you'd create a story through. So you can do your traditional slides, or you can use this pan and zoom guided journey layout, whichever one makes the most sense for the story you're telling. Regardless of which of those two types of stories you use, you can affect the timeline of a scene. If you wish, you can present, and you can just click, next slide, next slide, next slide, or next scene, next scene, next scene, technically. But you could also put timing on the scenes, and when you add timing to the scenes, you can talk about when objects in each piece appear and disappear in that timing, and I'll show you an example of that. And you can also highlight specific data in a visualization, if that makes sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Cognos Analytics. I'm going to exit this dashboard, and I'm going to edit a story that already exists, and I want to add to it. But before I can add to it, I actually need to go and pick up a couple of assets for my new story page. So I have a dashboard that contains two visualizations that I want to use in my story. I have this profitability widget, and I have this customer lifetime value widget that I want to add to a scene in my story. So I'm going to click on these guys, and I'm going to click the pin button on each one. So I've pinned that guy. I'll click on here. I'll pin this guy. So now these guys live in my collection of pins. So I can reuse them. So now I'm going to go and edit my story. So the story that I'm working on is this more valuable customers story. I'm going to open it. And when I open it, I can edit it. And it's made up of 4 scenes right now. And each of the scenes, as it turns out, has different assets on it. Some of them are images. Some of them are just text. Some of them are visualizations like the ones I just pinned. And I want to actually create a new scene to live between scene 2 and scene 3. So I'll click the new scene button. I won't worry about the layout right now, but as you see, there's a bunch of layouts with drop zones that will help you lay out your page. Let me drag this guy over and put it where I want it. And then let me put some items on the page. I'm going to drop that so I have more room. I'm going to go to my pins. So here's my collection of pinned items. You see it's here on the left. When I click on my collection of pins, you see I've got those items I pinned. I've actually pinned them twice, but obviously the tool doesn't care. Let me bring over my customer lifetime value and drop it in. I'm actually going to move it just a smidgen. And let me bring over my profitability and drop that in my page and see how that looks. Actually, that's not aligned too badly. Let me just move on again. In the interest of time, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time laying it out. I'm going to go to my my widgets button here, and I'm going to grab a text widget. And the text widget that I'm going to add is just going to label the screen here. And in my story, I'm trying to ask some questions and sort of lead my team along to a particular conclusion. And you see that luxury cars and luxury SUVs stand out in these two charts. So the question I'm asking when I present this scene is, does vehicle class, hello, so that's sort of the question, if you will, that labels this slide. And I can again spend a lot of time formatting and that sort of thing, but again, I'm just trying to give you the introduction, the gist of how you would add a scene to a story. I'm going to go ahead now and do a little bit more text. I'm going to add some text here that sort of answers the question or sort of interprets the chart for my customers. I'm going to say lifetime value is higher for luxury and SUV. And I'm going to resize this. Oh, I didn't spell luxury correctly. But I'm going to resize this so the text is a little more readable. And I could put some more text on down here to, whoops, I clicked text, I didn't drag text. So that's what happens when I click rather than drag. So let me undo that. Can I undo that? I have to be able to undo that. All right. And then drag down here, and claims are higher. Whoops, that's not. Come on. There. So I'm sort of pointing out the answer to my question that these data assets have presented. So now I've got the scene, but I don't want to present this all at once. When I show the scene, I don't want it all go boom and everybody see everything. I kind of want to walk them through it, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a timeline to this and animate. And so I'll open the timeline. This, I'm not sure why, but this is called a timeline scrubber in the documentation. You see that it's showing everything for the entire duration of how the scene will play, and the scene will play by default for 5 seconds. So I'm going to click on this guy. I'm just going to drag him over to 10 seconds because I want a total of 10 seconds. Let me zoom. Oops, wrong zoom. So that I can see my timeline a little better. So there, I'm going to go for 10 seconds. And, I don't really want this guy. I want him to end at 10. I want him to be visible the whole time, But I don't want to have him be visible to start. So I'll push him out to the end, but I'm going to take his beginning, and I'm going to put him in at, a little over 2 seconds. That's the profitability chart. This chart, this is the top chart. This is the second chart. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make him appear later. You see that these are in the order I added them to my scene, right? So this, right, this is the label. Now here I want that label up from the get-go. If I, this is my, my, hey, let me help interpret this chart for you. So I'm going to have that show up a little after the charts show up. And this guy should be up. He's the title. He should be up the whole time. Come on. He should be up the whole time. And then I want this little helper message. Got to click and then drag. I always forget to move over and then have him show up a little bit after that. Okay, let me just let me play this scene, see what it looks like. So the time goes on. I have the question, then my charts show up, and then my text should show up, and it ends after 10 seconds. Okay, so that's about right. The only thing is, maybe there's some data here that I want to highlight. So this is the display, just after 2 seconds. Maybe just a little bit in, I'm going to add a highlight right here. And I'm going to highlight the SUV and luxury columns. Okay, and then down here on this one, at the same time, I'm going to highlight the just the luxury one, because that helps reinforce the text that I'm about to show. So let me close that. Let me go ahead and close that, and let me rewind my scene. Let me just see how that looks. So asks about vehicle class. It shows my charts, which are now going out and getting new data. It did my highlighting. It added in my text. You see, now I could refine this. I could perfect the timing and so on. And while timing is not a requirement of the creating a story, I wanted to show you that, and then I wanted to show you the highlighting. But fundamentally, what I'm trying to show here is just to give you a picture of. I can add assets here. I could add visualizations from scratch here. I can go and add data sources to my story right here. So I didn't have to pin things, but I have the option to reuse assets that maybe informed me that I needed to tell this story in the first place, and go grab them, pin them, and reuse them here. And they're live. They're not static copies of when I pinned them. They're always going out to the data source and displaying. I can use the same capabilities I have in dashboards to ask questions, to have Cognos go out and find visualizations for me. I can drag data from the source and have it build a visualization from scratch. And I could pick the visualization I want and then populate it, just like I did in dashboards before. I have all those same options in dashboards and stories as far as building assets on the fly. And then, of course, I've got all my widgets, so I could add my shapes. I could, maybe change numbers to shapes in an infographic. All the capabilities that I learned when I learned dashboards, they all apply to building scenes and stories. Plus, I've got that animation, that scrubber that allows me to build a timeline and tell my story and weave the left brain and right brain components together into something that's compelling and present it using Cognos Analytics, which gives me the opportunity to interact with the data. I can stop a scene during the playback and interact with the data, answer questions to reinforce my claims or to respond to a new point of view. So that's the introduction to stories. I think I have time for a couple of questions. Let's take a look. If you have some questions you'd like me to answer, go ahead and submit them through the chat on the WebEx. A couple of you have already done so. Submit them even if you don't think I'll have time to answer them, because when I do run out of time, I will be happy to answer the question, any questions that are left, via email. So first question that I have. Thank you. So I want to roll out stories to only a subset of users, but when I give people access to dashboards, they all also get stories. Yes, they do. So Dashboards and stories are the same capabilities. So I'm talking to the Cognos administrators out there. Dashboards and stories are the same capability. The capability is called dashboards. If I give you the dashboard capability, not only do you get dashboards, you get stories. However, it is possible to hide components of the interface, like create a new dashboard. And I did this in an earlier webinar where I talked about the notion of customization when this features customization was introduced. I'm going to say it was release 7, and so you'll find it in my What's New in Release 7 video. If it wasn't 7, it was 6. And there's, I think, an actual example of doing this on the video. But in a nutshell, it's possible for you to customize the user interface by Cognos role. And associated with a role, using the Manage button, using the Accounts feature of the Manage button, you click on a role. One of the properties is called Customization, and one of the customizations is called Features. So if you want to give the story capability to only a subset of folks, you would need that subset of folks to be members of a Cognos role. You would customize that role in the Features section, and you would disable all of the entries in the features of the user interface that related to stories. So, for example, there'll be a portion in the features that talks about what's available when you click New, and you can uncheck stories from the New button. That way you can't create a new story. And so with this features customization, you can take a subset of folks, make them members of a role. In that role, disable the story feature. And that way you can control which folks get dashboards and stories and which folks just get dashboards by membership in that role. And I'm getting the high sign that I have run out of time today. So what remains is for me to say thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to being with you again on another Cognos Analytics topic very soon. Thanks so much.